Elena Bright stood in front of 500 wolves, and the man she loved looked straight through her, like she was made of smoke. "I refuse you," Damien Vale said, his voice carrying across the stone courtyard, without a single crack of hesitation. The words hit her harder than any blow could have. She felt the crowd's gasp before she heard it, a wave of shock rolling outward from the front rows to the back gates. Somewhere behind her, a woman whispered that this had never happened before, not in the history of the Vale Kingdom. An Alpha King did not reject his fated mate in front of his own people. It simply was not done. But Damien had done it. Elena's knees wanted to buckle, but she would not give him the satisfaction of watching her fall. She lifted her chin instead, the way her mother had taught her to do when the world tried to break her, and she looked at the man who had shared her bed only weeks before, who had whispered promises into her hair at midnight, who had told her she was the only wolf he had ever wanted to keep. Now he stood on a raised platform beside Vivian Locke, the daughter of the Locke pack, a family with enough soldiers and land to make any alliance worth breaking a heart over. Vivian's smile was small and satisfied, the smile of someone who had won a war she had never bothered to fight herself. "You heard him," Vivian said, loud enough for the wolves nearby to hear. "Run along." Elena did not answer her. She would not give this woman the gift of her voice shaking. She turned instead to look one more time at Damien, searching his face for some sign that this was a trick, some flicker in his golden eyes that would tell her he did not mean it, that there was a plan she did not yet understand. She found nothing. His jaw was tight, his shoulders squared, his expression as cold and finished as a door closing. "Damien," she said quietly, "only for him." "It is done, Elena," he said, and for one heartbeat, something moved behind his eyes, something that looked almost like regret. Then it was gone, buried under the weight of the crown he wore, and the kingdom that expected him to marry power instead of love. Wait, home. She had no home to go to. Not anymore. The rejection meant the end of her place in his territory, the end of her family's protection, the end of everything she had built her future around. A rejection was not simply a broken heart. Among wolves, it was a legal and spiritual severing, a public statement that she was no longer under his protection, and no longer welcome within his lands. Elena turned and walked away, before the tears could fall in front of the crowd. She kept her pace even, her back straight, until she passed through the iron gates of the courtyard, and the sound of the gathered wolves faded behind her. Only then did she let herself run. She ran past the training yards where she used to watch him spar with his guards, past the garden, where he had first kissed her under a sky full of stars, past the small cottage near the eastern wall, where they had spent stolen evenings pretending the outside world did not exist. She ran until her lungs burned and her legs shook, until the borders of the Vale territory disappeared behind the tree line, and only then did she stop, bent over with her hands on her knees, gasping for air that tasted like betrayal. A cold wind moved through the trees. Night was falling fast, and Elena had nowhere to go. She thought of her parents, both gone in a border skirmish 3 years earlier, and felt the old ache return alongside the new one. She thought of her few friends within the pack, all of whom would now be forbidden from helping her, since aiding a rejected wolf was considered a serious offense against the Alpha's authority. She thought of Damien's face in the moment before he had turned cold, and wondered, for the first time, if there had been a reason behind his cruelty that she simply did not know. It did not matter. Whatever his reasons, the result was the same. She was alone. Elena walked through the night without a clear direction, following an old trail she remembered from childhood trips with her mother, a trail that led toward the neutral lands, where no pack held claim, and wolves without a home sometimes gathered to survive. Her body wanted to shift, to let her wolf carry her faster and farther, but grief had a strange way of locking a person inside their human skin, and she could not find the calm required to change forms. By the time the sun rose, she had crossed out of Vale territory completely. The trees here were different, older, and closer together, and the air held a stillness that told her she had entered land nobody claimed. She found a stream and drank from it, then sat on a flat rock, and finally let herself cry, quietly, without an audience, the way she had refused to do in front of 500 wolves the night before. It was there, hours later, that Mara Doyle found her. Mara was a rogue wolf, lean and sharp-eyed, with a scar along her jaw that told a story she never explained to strangers. She approached slowly, the way one might approach a wounded animal, her hands visible, and her posture non-threatening. "You smell like Vale territory," Mara said. It was not an accusation, only an observation. Elena wiped her face and tried to compose herself. "I was rejected," she said, "because there was no point pretending otherwise." The scent of a broken bond clung to a wolf for days, and any experienced rogue would recognize it instantly. Mara's expression softened, just slightly. "By the king himself, if the smell is anything to go by." Elena nodded, unable to speak without her voice breaking. "Come with me," Mara said. "There's a camp a few hours from here. Nobody there cares whose mate you used to be. Out here, we only care whether you can carry your own weight and keep your word." Elena hesitated. Going with a stranger into the unknown territory felt like stepping off a cliff into darkness. But staying alone in the woods with winter approaching felt like a slower, quieter kind of death. She thought of her mother again, of the strength the older woman had shown even after losing everything, and she found a small piece of that same strength inside herself. "All right," Elena said. "Thank you." They walked together through the morning light, and for the first time since the courtyard, Elena felt something other than grief. It was small and fragile, and she did not yet trust it, but it felt almost like hope. As they walked, Mara asked simple questions, nothing too personal, giving Elena the space to answer only what she wanted to share. She learned that Mara had been rogue for 6 years, ever since her own pack had been destroyed by a rival faction, and that the camp she led now was a patchwork family of wolves who had nowhere else to belong. "We look out for each other," Mara explained. "That's the only rule that matters. Everything else, we figure out as we go." By midday, they reached the camp, a collection of simple cabins and tents built into a hillside, hidden well enough that even trained trackers might walk past without noticing. A dozen or so wolves moved between the structures, tending fires, mending clothes, sharpening tools. They looked up as Mara and Elena approached, curious but not unkind. "New arrival," Mara announced simply. "Give her room to breathe." Elena felt the weight of their eyes on her, but nobody pressed for her story. A young woman named Iris brought her a bowl of warm stew without a word, and an older man named Corin offered her a blanket and pointed toward an empty cabin she could use. That night, lying alone in an unfamiliar bed, Elena finally let herself think clearly about everything that had happened. The humiliation in the courtyard, the cold finality in Damien's voice, the way Vivian Locke had smiled, like she had already won something precious. And then, quietly, in the dark, Elena placed a hand over her stomach. She had suspected it for 2 weeks now, ever since the sickness in the mornings had become impossible to ignore, ever since her body had begun to feel subtly, unmistakably different. She had planned to tell Damien that very week, before the ceremony, before everything fell apart. She had imagined his face lighting up with joy, had imagined them raising a child together within the safety of his kingdom. Instead, she was alone in a rogue camp, rejected by the father of her unborn child, and utterly unsure of what the future would hold. Elena closed her eyes and made herself a quiet promise in the darkness. Whatever happened next, whatever the world threw at her, she would protect this child with everything she had. Damien Vale had made his choice in that courtyard, in front of everyone who mattered to him. He had chosen power over her. He did not get to choose their child too. Outside, the wind moved gently through the trees, and somewhere in the distance, an owl called out into the night. Elena pressed a hand to her stomach and, for the first time since the rejection, allowed herself to imagine a future. It would not be the future she had planned. It would not include a crown, or a kingdom, or the man who had once made her feel like the safest person in the world. But it would be hers, and it would be enough. The next morning, she woke to the sound of laughter outside her cabin, and for a brief, strange moment, she almost forgot where she was. Then the memories returned, sharp and heavy, and she rose slowly, dressing in the simple clothes Mara had left for her the night before. Outside, the camp was already alive with activity. Corin was teaching 2 young wolves how to set snares along the tree line, while Iris worked over a fire, boiling water for the morning meal. Mara spotted Elena and waved her over. "Sleep all right?" Mara asked. "Well enough," Elena replied, which was not entirely true, but close enough not to feel like a lie. Mara studied her for a long moment, the way someone studies a puzzle they cannot quite solve. "You're carrying something heavier than a broken heart," she said finally. It was not a question. Elena's hand moved instinctively toward her stomach before she could stop it, and Mara's sharp eyes caught the motion immediately. "I see," Mara said quietly. Elena braced herself for judgment, for pity, for some reaction that would make her feel even smaller than she already did. Instead, Mara simply nodded, as though this new information changed nothing about her opinion of the younger woman. "Then we'll make sure you're strong enough for both of you," Mara said. "Come, eat something. You'll need your strength." Elena felt tears prick at her eyes again, but this time they were not tears of grief. They were something closer to gratitude, the kind of relief that comes when a stranger chooses kindness instead of cruelty, when the world offers a small mercy after delivering an unbearable blow. She followed Mara toward the fire, toward the warm stew and the quiet company of wolves who owed her nothing and offered everything anyway. As she sat down among them, Elena allowed herself, just for a moment, to believe that she might survive this after all. Far away, in the stone halls of the Vale Kingdom, Damien sat alone in his chambers, long after the ceremony had ended, staring at a wall, without truly seeing it. The advisors had praised his decision, calling it wise, calling it necessary, for the future security of the kingdom. Vivian's family controlled trade routes and soldiers that Damien's kingdom desperately needed, and the marriage would secure peace along a border that had seen too much conflict in recent years. It had been the right choice. Every advisor told him so. Every strategic calculation confirmed it. So why did it feel like he had just made the worst mistake of his life? Damien closed his eyes and saw Elena's face again, the way her chin had lifted, even as her whole world crumbled in front of 500 witnesses. He saw the flash of pain in her eyes before she had hidden it, the same eyes that used to look at him like he hung the moon in the sky each night. He told himself it did not matter. He told himself that a king's duty came before a king's heart, that love was a luxury he could not afford, that Elena would find somewhere safe to land and eventually forget him, the way people always seem to move on from things that once felt permanent. He told himself all of this, and none of it made the empty feeling in his chest go away. Outside his window, the sun continued to set over a kingdom that believed its alpha had made the right choice. None of them knew what he had truly given up. None of them knew that somewhere beyond his borders, the woman he had rejected in front of everyone he ruled was carrying a piece of him that would one day return to change everything. 3 weeks passed before Elena allowed herself to fully trust the quiet safety of the rogue camp, and even then, trust came slowly, like ice thawing over a long winter. She spent her mornings helping Iris prepare meals, her afternoons learning small remedies from an elderly healer named Nora who lived at the edge of the camp, and her evenings sitting by the fire with Mara, listening to stories about the other wolves who had found their way there over the years. Each of them carried a different wound. Each of them had built a new life out of the pieces left behind by an old one. Elena found comfort in that. She was not the only person in the world who had lost everything and kept walking anyway. Still, some mornings were harder than others. The sickness came and went unpredictably, and though Nora had quietly guessed the truth within days of Elena's arrival, she never pushed for details Elena was not ready to share. Instead, the older woman simply began preparing gentle teas that settled Elena's stomach and left small offerings of dried herbs outside her cabin door without comment. "You don't have to explain yourself to me," Nora told her one afternoon, as Elena sat on a wooden stool while the healer checked her pulse and the color in her cheeks. "Whatever brought you here, whatever you're carrying, none of that changes how we treat you. You're part of this camp now." Elena swallowed against the tightness in her throat. "Thank you," she managed. "Don't thank me yet," Nora said with a small, knowing smile. "Wait until you're 6 months along and can't see your own feet. Then we'll talk about gratitude." Despite everything, Elena laughed, a genuine sound that surprised her with how foreign it felt after weeks of grief. It was the first time she had laughed since the courtyard, and something in her chest loosened slightly at the sound of it. As the days turned into weeks, Elena began to understand the rhythm of camp life. Mara ran things with a quiet, steady authority, never raising her voice, never needing to. The other wolves respected her not out of fear, but out of genuine loyalty, the kind that only grows from years of proven trust. Watching her, Elena began to understand that leadership did not require a crown or a title. It only required someone willing to put others before themselves, consistently, without needing praise for it. It was a lesson that stood in sharp contrast to everything she had learned in Damien's kingdom, where politics and alliances often mattered more than the people they were meant to protect. One evening, as autumn began to turn the leaves gold and red, Elena sat with Mara near the fire while the rest of the camp settled in for the night. The air had grown cooler, carrying the first real hint of the winter to come. "You've been quiet today," Mara observed, poking at the fire with a long stick. "I've been thinking about after," Elena admitted. "About what happens when the baby comes. I can't stay hidden in these woods forever. Eventually, people will ask questions. Eventually, someone from the Vale Kingdom might find out." Mara's expression grew serious. "You're worried he'll come looking." "I don't know what worries me more," Elena said softly. "That he'll come looking, or that he won't?" Mara studied her for a long moment before speaking again. "For what it's worth, I don't think a king who truly didn't care would still be the reason you can't sleep some nights. I've heard you, you know, through the cabin walls." Elena felt heat rise to her cheeks, embarrassed that her private grief had not been as private as she assumed. "It's complicated," she said. "Love usually is," Mara replied. "But you don't need him to raise this child. You have people here now. That's not nothing." Elena nodded, grateful beyond words for the community that had wrapped itself around her without asking anything in return. Still, a part of her could not stop wondering what Damien was doing at that very moment, whether he ever thought of her, whether some part of him regretted the choice he had made in front of the entire kingdom. She pushed the thought away, the same way she had learned to push away most thoughts of him, burying them beneath the practical demands of building a new life. There would be time to think about Damien later, if there needed to be time at all. For now, she had a child to protect, and a body that grew stronger and rounder with each passing week, carrying proof of a love that had once felt unbreakable. As winter approached, Elena began training with Mara in the early mornings, learning to defend herself in ways she had never needed to, while living under the protection of a powerful pack. Mara taught her how to move quietly through the trees, how to read the subtle signs of danger in the forest, how to trust her instincts even when her body felt slower and heavier than before. "A wolf who can't protect herself can't protect her pup either," Mara explained during one of their sessions, watching Elena practice a defensive stance with careful patience. "I won't let you be helpless out here. Not after everything you've already survived." Elena appreciated the honesty more than she could express. There was no pity in Mara's teaching, no soft treatment because of her condition. There was only the steady, practical belief that Elena deserved to be strong, that she was capable of more than the courtyard in Vale territory had ever allowed her to prove. By the time the first snow fell over the camp, Elena had changed in ways she barely recognized in herself. The frightened, heartbroken woman, who had stumbled into these woods months earlier, had slowly become someone steadier, someone who understood her own strength in a way she never had before. She still thought of Damien sometimes, especially in the quiet moments before sleep, when memories crept in uninvited. But the sharp, unbearable pain of those early days had softened into something more manageable, something she could carry without it consuming her entirely. One cold evening, as she sat wrapped in blankets near the fire, her hand resting on the curve of her growing stomach, Elena allowed herself a small, private smile. "Whoever you turn out to be," she whispered quietly to the child within her, "you're already loved more than you'll ever know. And you're already stronger than the people who tried to break us." The fire crackled softly in response, and somewhere in the trees beyond the camp, the wind carried her words out into the winter night, toward a future neither she nor Damien could yet imagine. Spring arrived slowly that year, melting the snow in patches across the hillside camp, and with it came the final weeks of Elena's pregnancy. Her body had grown heavy and tired, but her spirit had grown steadier with each passing month, strengthened by the community that had become her family in every way that mattered. Nora checked on her daily now, monitoring the final stretch with careful attention, while Mara made sure the cabin Elena stayed in remained warm and well-stocked, refusing to let her lift anything heavier than a spoon. "You've done enough hard work carrying this pup through a hard winter," Mara told her firmly one morning, taking a basket of firewood out of Elena's hands before she could argue. "Let us take care of the rest." Elena had learned by now not to fight Mara's stubbornness. Instead, she spent her days resting, preparing small clothes and blankets with Iris, and listening to Nora's stories about the many births she had overseen in her decades as a healer. "Every birth is different," Nora told her one afternoon, sitting beside Elena's bed with a cup of warm tea between her weathered hands. "But every mother finds strength she didn't know she had. You will too." Elena wanted to believe her, though fear crept in more often than she liked to admit. She was giving birth far from any proper healer's den, far from the comforts a royal birth would have provided within Vale territory. But she reminded herself, again and again, that comfort had never been the thing keeping her safe. Family had. And here, surrounded by people who had chosen her without obligation, she felt safer than she ever had within stone walls and royal titles. The birth itself came on a rainy evening in early spring, arriving with an intensity that left Elena breathless and disoriented, gripping Mara's hand so tightly that her knuckles turned white. Nora moved with calm efficiency throughout the long hours that followed, murmuring gentle instructions, wiping sweat from Elena's forehead, reminding her to breathe when the pain became too much to bear silently. Hours passed in a blur of exhaustion and determination, until finally, just before dawn, the cabin filled with the sound of a newborn's cry. Nora lifted the baby carefully, wrapping him in a soft blanket, before placing him gently in Elena's trembling arms. "A son," she said softly, her voice thick with emotion, despite decades of experience with such moments. "A healthy, strong son." Elena looked down at the small face in her arms, and the entire world seemed to shrink down to that single, perfect moment. The baby's eyes opened briefly, and even through the exhaustion clouding her mind, Elena noticed immediately the unusual shade of silver that colored them, a shade she had seen only once before, in the eyes of the man who had once claimed to love her. "Kaelin," she whispered, the name coming to her instinctively, as though she had known it all along. "Your name is Kaelin." Mara, standing nearby with tears she made no effort to hide, smiled softly at the sight. "A strong name for a strong boy," she said. "He'll need it." Over the following days, word of Kaelin's birth spread quietly through the camp, and wolves who had never met Elena's child came to offer small gifts and quiet blessings, welcoming him the way they had welcomed his mother months before. There was no ceremony, no grand celebration befitting royal blood, only genuine warmth from people who understood, better than most, what it meant to build a family out of circumstances the world had never intended. As the weeks passed, however, it became increasingly clear that Kaelin was no ordinary pup. His silver eyes remained unusually sharp even for a newborn, following movement, with an alertness that surprised even Nora, who had seen countless children grow within the camp over the years. "He's got something in him," Nora observed one evening, watching as baby Kaelin gripped her finger with surprising strength. "Something powerful. You can feel it if you pay attention." Elena felt a familiar unease settle in her chest, though she said nothing at first. She had known, of course, that Kaelin carried royal blood, that his father's alpha lineage ran through him in ways an ordinary pups would not. But hearing Nora confirm what she had quietly suspected made the reality feel more urgent, more impossible to ignore. "What does that mean for him?" Elena asked eventually, unable to keep the worry from her voice. "For us?" Nora considered the question carefully before answering. "It means people will notice, eventually. Blood like that doesn't stay hidden forever, especially not once he's old enough to shift for the first time. You'll need to decide, sooner rather than later, how you want to handle that when it comes." Elena looked down at her sleeping son, his small chest rising and falling peacefully, unaware of the weight already gathering around his future. She thought of Damien, of the kingdom he ruled, of the crown that would one day be Kaelin's birthright whether either of them wanted it or not. "I'll protect him," Elena said quietly, more to herself than to Nora. "Whatever it takes. Whoever comes looking, I'll protect him." Mara, who had entered the cabin during the conversation, placed a firm hand on Elena's shoulder. "You won't be protecting him alone," she said. "This whole camp will stand with you, if it ever comes to that. You're one of us now, both of you." Elena felt tears sting her eyes at the fierce loyalty in Mara's voice, grateful once again for the family she had found, in the most unexpected of places. Whatever challenges lay ahead, whatever threats the future might bring, she was no longer facing them as the frightened, rejected woman who had stumbled into these woods months earlier. She was a mother now, fierce and determined, surrounded by a community that had chosen to protect her without hesitation. and she would need every ounce of that strength, though she did not yet know how soon the world beyond the camp would come searching for the child sleeping peacefully in her arms. As spring deepened into early summer, Kalen grew quickly, his silver eyes remaining a source of quiet fascination among the camp's wolves. He rarely cried, watching the world around him with an unusual calm intensity that Nora insisted was a clear sign of alpha blood, asserting itself even in infancy. Elena watched her son grow with a mixture of pride and quiet dread, knowing that each passing month brought them closer to a reckoning she could not avoid forever. But for now, within the safety of the hillside camp, she allowed herself to simply enjoy the small, precious moments of motherhood, treasuring the quiet mornings and gentle evenings before the storm she sensed gathering somewhere beyond the trees finally arrived. In the stone halls of the Vale Kingdom, the months following the courtyard ceremony had not brought Damien the peace and stability his advisors had promised. His marriage to Vivian Locke had been arranged with careful precision, every detail negotiated to strengthen the borders and secure trade routes his kingdom desperately needed. On paper, it was a flawless alliance. In practice, it was a quiet disaster. Vivian had never wanted a partnership built on mutual respect. She had wanted a crown, and once she secured her place beside Damien, her true nature revealed itself slowly, like a storm gathering strength before finally breaking. She undermined his advisors when it suited her ambitions, formed private alliances with members of his own council, and made it clear, in subtle and not-so-subtle ways, that her loyalty belonged to her own family's interests, before it belonged to him or his kingdom. Damien discovered the depth of her betrayal on a quiet evening, months into the arrangement, when one of his most trusted guards brought him documents proving Vivian had been secretly communicating with a rival kingdom, offering information about Vale's defenses in exchange for future political favors, should her own family ever seek to expand their territory at his expense. The betrayal did not surprise him as much as it should have. Somewhere, deep down, he had known from the beginning that their arrangement was built on nothing more than convenience and shared ambition. There had never been trust between them, only the careful pretense of partnership. He confronted her that same night, and when she offered no real denial, only a cold acknowledgement that she had simply been protecting her own family's interests the way any smart wolf would, Damien ended the arrangement without hesitation. The Locke family withdrew their support immediately, and the alliance he had sacrificed everything to secure crumbled within a matter of days. The kingdom's advisors panicked, warning of renewed conflict along the borders now that the fragile peace had collapsed. Damien listened to their concerns with a calm exterior that masked the storm building inside him. He had given up so much for an alliance that it ultimately meant nothing, had rejected the one woman who had never once tried to manipulate him for personal gain. And for what? A partnership built on lies that fell apart within months anyway. Alone in his chambers each night, Damien found himself thinking of Elena more and more often, the memories surfacing with a clarity he could not suppress no matter how hard he tried. He remembered the warmth of her laughter, the genuine way she had cared for him without any political motive clouding her affection. He remembered the softness in her eyes before the courtyard, before he had destroyed everything between them with 3 cruel words spoken in front of an audience that no longer mattered nearly as much as he had believed at the time. He began, quietly at first, to ask questions about her whereabouts. His closest advisor, a steady and loyal wolf named Gideon, brought him what little information he could gather, though rumors were scarce. Elena had disappeared from Vale territory entirely, leaving no clear trail for anyone to follow. She may have joined a rogue pack somewhere beyond the borders, Gideon suggested carefully one evening, watching his king's reaction with quiet concern. Many rejected wolves find their way to such places. It would explain why no formal territory has claimed her. Damien said nothing for a long moment, staring out the window of his chambers, toward the dark tree line beyond the kingdom's walls. "Find her," he said finally, his voice quiet but resolute. "Discreetly. I need to know she's safe." Gideon hesitated before responding. "And if she is?" "What then, my king? You rejected her publicly. There's no simple way to undo something like that, not without significant consequences for the kingdom's stability." "I know," Damien admitted, the weight of his own mistake settling heavily across his shoulders. "But I need to know regardless. Some mistakes deserve to be corrected, even if the cost is high." Gideon nodded slowly, recognizing the determination in his king's voice. and set about the quiet task of searching for a woman who had vanished so thoroughly that even the most skilled trackers found themselves without a single reliable lead. Weeks passed without success, though rumors occasionally surfaced, whispers of a rogue camp somewhere in the neutral lands beyond Vale's borders, whispers of a healer with unusual skill who had appeared among them sometime during the previous year. None of the rumors offered anything concrete, and Damien grew increasingly restless as the search continued without resolution. Meanwhile, whispers of a different kind began circulating through the kingdom's inner circles, rumors far more concerning than a missing woman from months earlier. Word had reached certain members of the council, through channels difficult to trace, that a rogue camp somewhere beyond the northern border had welcomed a child bearing unmistakable alpha traits, a child whose silver eyes and unusual strength had already become the subject of curious conversation among wolves who had witnessed him. The rumors reached Gideon before they reached Damien, and the loyal advisor found himself facing an impossible decision. If the rumors were true, if this child truly carried alpha bloodline traits strong enough to draw such attention, the implications for the kingdom's future were significant. An unclaimed heir, born outside the formal structures of pack law, represented both an opportunity and a considerable threat, depending on who discovered the truth first, and what they chose to do with that knowledge. Gideon brought the rumors to Damien carefully, watching his king's face as he explained what little information had reached him. He watched as understanding slowly dawned across Damien's features, followed by a flash of hope so raw and immediate that it left no doubt about what the king was truly thinking. It could be nothing, Gideon cautioned quickly, sensing the dangerous hope building in his king's expression. Rumors travel and grow twisted along the way. We shouldn't assume anything without proper confirmation. Send trackers, Damien said immediately, his voice tight with barely contained urgency. I want to know everything. Where this camp is located, who leads it, and most importantly, who this child's mother is. Gideon nodded, already turning to arrange the necessary preparations, though a part of him worried about what such a discovery might mean, not just for the kingdom, but for the fragile hope now visible in his king's eyes for the first time in many long, difficult months. As the trackers departed the following morning, heading toward the neutral lands where rumors placed the mysterious rogue camp, Damien remained in his chambers, staring at the horizon, with a mixture of fear and desperate hope he had not allowed himself to feel, since the night he had watched Elena walk away from him forever. If the rumors proved true, if the child truly belonged to him, everything would change, and though he did not yet know what that change would cost him, or whether Elena would ever forgive the cruelty he had shown her, Damien found himself hoping, for the first time in longer than he could remember, that fate might offer him a chance to make things right. By the time Kalen celebrated his first year, the hillside camp had grown accustomed to the presence of a child unlike any other they had raised among their ranks. He walked earlier than most pups, spoke his first words earlier still, and carried himself with a quiet, watchful confidence that seemed far too mature for his age. Elena watched her son grow with a fierce protectiveness that colored every decision she made. She trained harder than ever under Mara's guidance, determined to become strong enough to shield Kalen from any danger that might one day find its way to their door. She learned to fight, to track, to sense danger long before it arrived, channeling months of quiet grief into a discipline that transformed her into someone she barely recognized from the heartbroken woman who had once stumbled into these woods. Nora, too, took a special interest in Kalen's development, documenting his growth with careful attention, noting each unusual milestone in a worn leather journal she kept hidden beneath her cabin floorboards. This child, she told Elena one quiet afternoon, watching Kalen attempt his first hesitant shift into wolf form, far earlier than any pup she had ever witnessed, carries more power than most alphas display in their entire lives. You need to be prepared for what that means. Elena understood the warning better than anyone. Power like that did not stay hidden forever, no matter how carefully she tried to protect her son from the world beyond their camp's borders. Already, she had noticed subtle changes in how visiting rogues reacted to Kalen, a wariness mixed with curiosity that told her word of his existence had likely begun spreading beyond their small, hidden community. She raised these concerns with Mara during one of their evening conversations by the fire, watching as her friend's expression grew serious in the flickering light. We've had visitors ask questions, Mara admitted reluctantly. Nothing direct, but enough curiosity that I don't think it will be long before someone connects the pieces. A child with alpha blood this strong, appearing out of nowhere in a rogue camp near Vale's northern border. It's the kind of story that travels fast, whether we want it to or not. Elena felt a familiar fear tighten in her chest, though she had spent enough months preparing for this exact possibility that panic no longer overwhelmed her the way it once might have. "What do you suggest?" she asked instead, trusting Mara's judgment after months of proven loyalty and wisdom. "We stay vigilant," Mara said firmly. "We continue training you, continue preparing Kalen as he grows, and we make sure this camp remains as hidden and defensible as possible. But I won't lie to you, Elena. If someone from Vale's kingdom truly wants to find you, eventually, they likely will. The question isn't whether that day comes, it's whether we're ready for it when it does." Elena nodded, grateful once again for Mara's honesty, even when that honesty carried uncomfortable truths she would rather avoid. Over the following weeks, the camp's defenses grew noticeably stronger, with additional patrols established along the surrounding tree line and new escape routes carefully mapped in case a hasty retreat ever became necessary. Through it all, Kalen remained blissfully unaware of the quiet tension building around him, spending his days exploring the camp with boundless curiosity, forming close bonds with the other wolves who had watched him grow from his earliest days. He adored Nora's gentle stories, followed Mara around with obvious admiration whenever she allowed it, and clung close to his mother during the quiet evening hours when the camp settled down for the night. Elena treasured these ordinary moments more than she could express, aware that the peaceful bubble surrounding their small family might not last forever. She told Kalen stories about brave wolves and loyal friends, careful never to mention his father directly, though she often wondered how she would eventually explain his origins once he grew old enough to ask difficult questions. That reckoning arrived sooner than she expected, on a quiet afternoon when Kalen, now old enough to form complete sentences, looked up at her with his striking silver eyes and asked simply, "Why don't I have a father like the other pups do?" Elena felt her heart clench painfully at the innocent question, unprepared, despite months of quiet worry, about exactly this moment. She knelt down to meet his eyes directly, choosing her words with careful deliberation. "You have a father," she said gently. "He lives far away, in a place we can't visit right now. But that doesn't mean he isn't part of your story, Kalen. Someday, when you're older, I'll tell you everything." Kalen considered this answer with the same thoughtful seriousness he brought to everything, then nodded slowly, apparently satisfied for the moment, before running off to join the other children playing near the fire pit. Elena watched him go, her chest tight with unspoken emotion, wondering how much longer she could keep the full truth hidden from a son who grew more perceptive with each passing day. That night, unable to sleep, she found herself standing outside her cabin, staring up at the stars scattered across the clear night sky. She thought of Damien, wondering, as she often still did in quiet moments, whether he ever thought of her, whether he had any idea that a son bearing his eyes and his blood was growing up in a hidden camp beyond his kingdom's borders. Mara found her there sometime later, wrapping a warm blanket around Elena's shoulders without a word, before settling beside her. "You're thinking about him again," Mara observed quietly. "I can't help it," Elena admitted. "Kalen asked about his father today. I didn't know what to say." "You said what needed to be said, for now," Mara reassured her. "The rest will come when it needs to. You've built something remarkable here, Elena. Don't let old wounds convince you otherwise." Elena nodded, grateful for the steady comfort of her friend's presence, though the question lingered in her mind long after Mara returned to her own cabin for the night. She stayed outside a while longer, watching the stars, wondering what the future held for her small, resilient family, and hoping, despite everything, that whatever came next would not shatter the fragile peace they had worked so hard to build. Somewhere beyond the tree line, unknown to her, the king's trackers had already begun closing in on rumors that would soon lead them directly toward the hidden camp she called home. The trackers Damien sent moved carefully through the neutral lands, following rumors that grew more consistent the further they traveled from the safety of Vale territory. Led by a seasoned wolf named Silas Kane, the small group had spent weeks piecing together fragments of information from travelers, merchants, and the occasional rogue willing to trade rumors for coin. Silas had served the Vale Kingdom for many years, earning a reputation as one of the most capable trackers within Damien's ranks. He approached the assignment with characteristic thoroughness, aware that his king's uncharacteristic urgency about this particular mission suggested something far more personal than a routine investigation. The stories keep pointing toward the same hillside region, Silas reported to his small team one evening, spreading a rough map across their campfire. A rogue camp, well hidden, led by a woman, with a reputation for fierce loyalty to her people, and a child, several years old now, whose eyes apparently mark him as something other than ordinary. His second in command, a quiet wolf named Fen, studied the map carefully. If the rumors are accurate, this could complicate things significantly for the kingdom. An unclaimed heir with that kind of bloodline strength, raised outside official pack structures. Other kingdoms would pay considerable amounts for that kind of information, or worse, for the chance to eliminate a threat before it fully matures. Silas nodded grimly, aware of the delicate nature of their mission. Which is exactly why the king wants this handled quietly. We confirm the truth first. Everything else comes after. They pressed onward over the following days, moving carefully through unfamiliar territory, aware that rogue camps often maintain sophisticated warning systems, designed to detect outsiders long before they arrived. Silas had no interest in triggering unnecessary conflict, understanding that whatever they found deserved careful, respectful handling, rather than the aggressive approach some might have favored. Meanwhile, back at the hillside camp, Mara's scouts had already noticed unfamiliar scents along the northern perimeter, unfamiliar enough to warrant immediate concern. She gathered her most trusted wolves for a quiet meeting, keeping her voice low despite the privacy of her own cabin. "Someone's been tracking through our territory," she explained, her expression tight with controlled tension. "Careful, experienced trackers, based on how little trace they've left behind. This isn't a random rogue passing through. This feels deliberate." Corin, who had lived among rogue camps for most of his adult life, frowned deeply at the news. Veil trackers, most likely, given the direction they're approaching from. If the rumors about Kaelin have finally reached the kingdom, this was probably inevitable. Mara nodded reluctantly, already turning her thoughts toward contingency plans they had spent months preparing for exactly this scenario. "We need to warn Elena," she said. "She deserves to know what's coming, and to decide for herself how she wants to handle it." She found Elena later that same evening, sitting with Kaelin near the fire, as he practiced forming simple words with careful concentration, his silver eyes bright with the innocent focus of a child, untouched by the concerns weighing on the adults around him. "We need to talk," Mara said quietly, gesturing for Elena to join her a short distance away, out of Kaelin's immediate hearing. Elena's stomach tightened with familiar dread as she followed Mara toward the edge of the firelight. "What's happened?" "Trackers," Mara said simply. "Experienced ones, moving carefully through our northern perimeter. Corin believes they're likely from Vale." Elena felt the news settle over her like a physical weight, the moment she had spent years quietly dreading finally arriving without warning. She had known, somewhere deep down, that this day would eventually come. Kaelin's power was too significant to remain hidden indefinitely, no matter how carefully they protected their small, hidden world. "What do we do?" Elena asked, her voice steadier than she expected, strengthened by years of training and preparation under Mara's patient guidance. "That depends on what you want," Mara said honestly. "We can relocate the camp entirely, disappear before they ever get close enough to confirm anything. Or we can wait, see what they actually want, and decide from there whether confrontation or negotiation makes more sense." Elena considered the options carefully, glancing back toward the fire, where Kaelin continued playing, blissfully unaware of the decision being made on his behalf. She thought of Damien, of the courtyard, of the cruel words that had once shattered her entire world. She thought, too, of the months of quiet strength she had built since then, the fierce protectiveness that had transformed her into someone capable of facing this moment without collapsing under its weight. "I won't run forever," Elena said finally, her voice firm with newfound resolve. "If they're truly Vale's trackers, if this truly is about Kaelin, then eventually I'll have to face this regardless. Better to control how that happens than to keep hiding indefinitely and risk them finding us unprepared." Mara studied her for a long moment before nodding slowly, respect evident in her expression. "Then we prepare properly," she said. "Whatever happens next, you won't face it without support standing beside you." The following days passed in tense preparation. The camp's defenses strengthened further, as everyone quietly readied themselves for whatever confrontation might be approaching. Elena spent extra time with Kaelin each evening, treasuring the ordinary moments a little more fiercely, aware that their peaceful existence might soon change in ways neither of them could fully predict. Silas and his team, meanwhile, finally located clear evidence of the hidden camp's general location, close enough now that careful, deliberate movement became essential to avoid triggering unwanted conflict. "We approach cautiously," Silas instructed his team as they prepared for the final stretch of their journey. "No aggression, no threats. We're here to confirm information, nothing more." The king was clear about that. Fen nodded, though his expression remained thoughtful. "And if the child truly is his, what then?" Silas paused, considering the question carefully before answering. "Then everything changes. For the kingdom, and for whoever this woman turns out to be. But that's not our decision to make. Our job is simply to bring back the truth." With that, the small group moved forward once more, drawing steadily closer to a hidden camp that had spent years successfully avoiding exactly this kind of discovery, unaware that the careful peace Elena had built for herself and her son was about to be tested in ways she had spent years quietly preparing for, yet somehow still felt entirely unready to face. The morning the trackers finally reached the outer edge of the hillside camp, Mara's scouts intercepted them before they could get close enough to observe anything of significance. Silas, true to his cautious nature, made no attempt to resist or fight his way past the rogues who surrounded his small team, instead raising his hands in a clear gesture of peaceful intent. "We're not here for conflict," he said calmly, addressing the sharp-eyed rogue who seemed to be leading the group that had intercepted them. "We're here on behalf of the Vale Kingdom, seeking only confirmation of certain information, nothing more." The rogue studied him carefully for a long moment, before finally nodding, gesturing for her companions to lower their weapons slightly, though the tension in the small clearing remained palpable. "Wait here," she instructed firmly. "I'll inform our leader of your request." She disappeared into the trees, leaving Silas and his team standing in uncertain silence, surrounded by wolves whose loyalty clearly belonged entirely to whoever led this hidden community. Minutes passed slowly, before Mara herself finally emerged from the tree line, her expression carefully neutral as she assessed the small group of Vale representatives standing before her. "You've traveled a long way," Mara observed, her tone giving nothing away. "State your purpose clearly, and we'll decide how to proceed from there." Silas met her gaze steadily, recognizing immediately the quiet authority radiating from this woman despite her relatively unassuming appearance. "We seek confirmation of rumors reaching Vale territory," he explained carefully. "Rumors of a child within your camp bearing unusual traits consistent with strong alpha bloodline. Our king has reason to believe this child may be connected to him personally." Mara's expression remained impressively composed, though Silas caught the briefest flicker of confirmation in her eyes, before she carefully masked it once more. "And if such a child exists," she said slowly, "what exactly does your king intend to do with that information?" "That," Silas admitted honestly, "depends entirely on what we find here today." Mara considered his words carefully, weighing the situation with the same careful judgment that had kept her camp safe and hidden for so many years. Finally, she made her decision, turning to lead them deeper into the camp's territory, though she kept several of her own trusted wolves close by as a precaution. "Follow me," she said simply, "but understand clearly, if any harm comes to this family, because of what happens here today, your kingdom will find itself facing an enemy, far more determined than you currently realize." Silas nodded solemnly, understanding the weight of her warning completely. "Understood. We seek only truth today, nothing more." They walked together through the camp, drawing curious glances from wolves who paused their daily activities to observe the unusual arrival of outsiders, wearing Vale's distinctive colors. Word spread quickly through the small community, and by the time they reached the central clearing near the main fire pit, a considerable crowd had gathered to witness whatever was about to unfold. Elena stood near her cabin, having been warned moments earlier by one of Mara's scouts about the approaching visitors. Her heart pounded fiercely as she watched the group draw closer, recognizing immediately the distinctive uniform worn by Vale Kingdom trackers, confirming her worst fears about the purpose of their arrival. She had kept Kaelin close beside her, his small hand gripped tightly in hers, though he sensed the tension radiating from the adults around him, and had grown unusually quiet, watching the approaching strangers with the same intense, watchful curiosity that had marked him since birth. When Silas finally caught sight of the child standing beside Elena, he stopped walking entirely, staring in undisguised shock at the unmistakable silver eyes staring back at him. There could be no doubt remaining about the child's heritage. Those eyes belonged unmistakably to the Vale bloodline, a distinctive trait passed down through generations of Alpha rulers. "By the moon," Silas murmured quietly, unable to fully mask his astonishment. Elena watched his reaction with a mixture of dread and grim confirmation, understanding immediately that whatever careful anonymity she had maintained for years had just come to a definitive end. There was no denying Kaelin's heritage now, not with a trained tracker standing directly before them, witnessing the undeniable proof with his own eyes. "I assume you have questions," Elena said finally, breaking the tense silence that had settled over the clearing, her voice steadier than she felt internally. Silas composed himself quickly, recognizing the need for careful diplomacy in this delicate situation. "My king sent us seeking confirmation of rumors," he explained. "I believe we've found exactly what we came searching for." "And what happens now?" Mara interjected sharply, positioning herself protectively closer to Elena and Kaelin. Silas hesitated, clearly uncertain how to answer such a significant question without proper authority to make decisions of this magnitude. "I need to report back to King Vale immediately," he said finally. "This is far beyond what I'm authorized to handle independently, but I suspect he'll want to come here himself, once he learns the truth." Elena felt her stomach twist painfully at the prospect of Damien arriving at the camp personally, of facing him again, after years of careful distance and quiet healing. She had built an entirely new life since their painful separation, had grown into someone far stronger than the heartbroken woman who had once fled his kingdom in humiliation and grief. She was not certain she was ready to face him again, especially not with Kaelin standing beside her, innocent and unaware of the complicated history connecting him to a father he had never known. "Tell him," Elena said finally, her voice carrying newfound strength despite the fear churning beneath the surface, "that if he wishes to see his son, he'll need to come here personally. I won't send Kaelin anywhere without me, and I won't be summoned like some forgotten subject awaiting royal instruction." Silas nodded slowly, recognizing the fierce determination behind her words. "I'll deliver your message exactly as spoken," he promised. "Whatever happens next, that decision belongs entirely to you." With that, the trackers departed as carefully as they had arrived, leaving behind a camp buzzing with quiet, anxious conversation about what their discovery might mean for the future. Elena knelt down beside Kaelin, once the visitors had disappeared from view, studying her son's curious expression carefully. "Who were they, Mama?" Kaelin asked, his silver eyes bright with innocent curiosity. Elena hesitated only briefly, before answering honestly, aware that the time for careful evasion had likely come to an end. "They came from your father's kingdom," she said gently. "It seems, very soon, you might finally get the chance to meet him." Kaelin's eyes widened with surprised excitement at the possibility, and Elena felt her heart clench with complicated emotion, watching her son's innocent hope collide directly with her own carefully guarded fears about what a reunion with Damien might ultimately bring for both of them. Damien received Silas's report, standing perfectly still in his private chambers, listening, as the loyal tracker described everything he had witnessed at the hidden camp, from the child's unmistakable silver eyes to the fierce protectiveness surrounding both mother and son. When Silas finished speaking, Damien remained silent for a long moment, processing information that confirmed both his deepest hope and his most significant fear simultaneously. Elena had survived. She had built a new life, raised their son successfully, and had done so entirely without him, entirely because of choices he alone had made in that courtyard years earlier. "I need to go to her," Damien said finally, his voice quiet but resolute. Gideon, who had listened to the report alongside his king, raised a cautious hand. "My king, consider carefully what such a journey might mean, both politically and personally. The kingdom remains unstable following the collapse of your alliance with the Locke family. Leaving now, for reasons that will inevitably become public knowledge, carries significant risk." "I'm aware of the risks," Damien replied firmly. "But I have a son, Gideon. A son I never knew existed, raised by a woman I wronged in ways I still struggle to forgive myself for. I won't ignore that reality simply because the timing proves politically inconvenient. Gideon studied his king carefully, recognizing the unwavering determination in his expression. Then I'll arrange for a small, discreet escort, he said finally. But my king, please consider carefully how you approach this reunion. Elena Bright owes you nothing, least of all forgiveness. Whatever happens, tread carefully. Damien nodded, understanding completely the weight of Gideon's warning. He had spent years now reflecting on his mistake, on the cruel words he had spoken in front of an entire kingdom, on the devastating consequences that single choice had created for a woman who had loved him without condition, and for a son who had grown up entirely without knowledge of his own father. He departed for the neutral lands 3 days later, accompanied only by Silas and a small handful of trusted guards, keeping the journey as quiet and unofficial as possible to avoid drawing unnecessary political attention before he had even confirmed the full situation for himself. The journey took several days, and with each passing mile, Damien found himself growing increasingly nervous, rehearsing words he knew would likely prove inadequate for the magnitude of what he needed to say. How did one apologize for a wound as deep as public rejection? How did one explain years of absence to a son who had never known him? When they finally arrived at the outer edge of the hillside camp, Mara's scouts intercepted them exactly as they had intercepted Silas's team weeks earlier, though this time, recognition of Damien's identity spread through the camp with considerably more urgency. Elena felt her heart pound violently the moment word reached her that Damien himself had arrived, standing at the edge of the camp awaiting permission to enter. She had spent weeks preparing herself for this exact moment, yet found herself entirely unprepared for the flood of complicated emotion that surged through her at the confirmation of his actual presence. Mara found her quickly, studying Elena's pale expression with quiet concern. "You don't have to do this today," she offered gently. "We can send him away, buy you more time to prepare." Elena shook her head slowly, drawing on the strength she had spent years carefully building. "No," she said finally. "It's time. Kalen deserves the chance to know his father, and I deserve the chance to finally face this properly, instead of running from it any longer." She found Kalen playing near their cabin, his silver eyes lighting up with excited curiosity, the moment she explained that his father had finally arrived. Together, hand in hand, they walked toward the central clearing where Damien waited, flanked by his small group of guards, his expression a mixture of nervous hope and barely restrained emotion. The moment Damien's eyes fell upon Elena, standing tall and strong before him, he felt the weight of years of regret settle heavily across his shoulders. She looked different than he remembered, stronger somehow, carrying herself with a quiet confidence that had not existed in the heartbroken woman he had watched walk away from him years earlier. Then his gaze shifted downward, toward the small child standing beside her, and Damien felt his breath catch entirely in his throat. There was no mistaking the resemblance, the silver eyes staring back at him, carrying an unmistakable echo of his own reflection. "Elena," Damien said quietly, his voice thick with emotion he could no longer contain. "I am so sorry. For everything. I never should have." "Save it," Elena interrupted, though her tone carried more exhaustion than anger. "Whatever apology you've prepared, it won't undo what happened in that courtyard. It won't give me back the years I spent building a life alone, terrified of what might happen if your kingdom ever discovered our son's existence." Damien nodded slowly, accepting her words without argument, understanding completely that he had forfeited any right to easy forgiveness through his own actions years earlier. "You're right," he admitted. "Nothing I say will undo the pain I caused you. But I'm here now, hoping, if nothing else, for the chance to know my son, and to prove, through actions rather than empty words, that I've changed since the man who stood on that platform and rejected the best thing that ever happened to him." Kalen, who had been watching the exchange with quiet, careful attention, finally spoke up, his young voice cutting through the tense silence between the two adults. "Are you really my father?" he asked directly, his silver eyes studying Damien with unmistakable curiosity. Damien knelt down slowly, bringing himself to eye level with the son he had never known existed until recently. "I am," he said softly, his voice trembling slightly with barely contained emotion. "And I am so sorry it's taken me this long to meet you. You deserved better than that, and I intend to spend as long as it takes proving that to you." Kalen studied him carefully for a long moment, his young mind processing this significant revelation with the same thoughtful seriousness he brought to everything. Finally, tentatively, he extended a small hand toward Damien. "Mama says you're a king," he said. "Does that mean I'm a prince?" Despite the emotional weight of the moment, Damien felt a small, genuine smile tug at his lips. "It does," he confirmed gently, carefully taking his son's small hand in his own. "Though being a good person matters far more than any title ever could, that's something I learned the hard way." Elena watched the exchange with complicated emotion, torn between old wounds that had never fully healed, and the undeniable warmth of watching her son finally meet the father he had wondered about for years. Whatever happened next, whatever complicated path lay ahead for their unconventional family, she understood clearly that this moment marked an irreversible turning point, one that would shape all their futures in ways none of them could yet fully predict. Damien remained near the camp for several days following that first emotional meeting, careful not to overstep the boundaries Elena had clearly established, yet determined to build a genuine relationship with the son he had only just discovered. He spent hours each day with Kalen, learning about his interests, listening to Nora's stories about his early development, and slowly earning small, tentative moments of trust from a child who had grown up entirely without a father's presence. Elena watched these interactions carefully, her guarded heart softening incrementally as she observed genuine effort from Damien, rather than empty gestures meant only to satisfy political obligation. Still, trust did not return easily, and she maintained careful emotional distance, unwilling to risk the pain of believing in promises that might once again prove hollow. Their fragile peace was shattered, however, when Gideon arrived unexpectedly one evening, his expression grim with urgent news that had traveled far faster than anyone anticipated. "My king," Gideon said quickly, pulling Damien aside from the fire, where he had been sitting with Elena and Kalen. "Word of Kalen's existence has reached beyond our borders. The Locke family, still bitter over the collapsed alliance, has apparently allied themselves with a faction within your own council, who fear the political instability an unclaimed heir might bring to the kingdom's succession." Damien's expression darkened considerably at the news. "What exactly are they planning?" "Information suggests they intend to eliminate the threat before it can properly establish itself," Gideon explained gravely. "They view Kalen not as your legitimate heir, but as a dangerous complication to their own ambitions for controlling the kingdom's future succession." The threat hit Damien with the force of a physical blow, the realization that his son's very existence had already placed him directly in danger, settling heavily across his chest. He returned immediately to where Elena sat with Kalen, his expression urgent enough that she recognized instantly something serious had occurred. "We need to talk," he said quietly, careful not to alarm Kalen unnecessarily. "Privately." Elena's stomach twisted with familiar dread as she followed him a short distance away, listening as he quickly relayed everything Gideon had just reported. The fear that had haunted her quietly for years, the fear of exactly this kind of danger finding their small family, had finally become an immediate, undeniable reality. "They mean to hurt him," Elena said, her voice tight with barely controlled fury. "A child, because his existence threatens their political ambitions." "I won't let that happen," Damien said firmly, his own protective instincts flaring with an intensity that surprised even himself. "Whatever it takes, I'll protect him. I'll protect both of you." Elena studied him carefully, searching for any hint of the cold calculation that had once led him to reject her so publicly for political convenience. She found instead genuine, fierce determination, the unmistakable protectiveness of a father who had only just discovered his son, yet already loved him, with an intensity that could not be manufactured or faked. "Then we fight together," Elena said finally, her voice steady with newfound resolve. "This camp has protected us for years. We won't abandon that strength now, not when it matters most." Mara, upon learning of the threat, immediately called together the camp's most skilled fighters, coordinating with Damien's guards to establish comprehensive defenses around the vulnerable hillside community. The unlikely alliance between rogue wolves and royal guards formed quickly under the shared urgency of protecting an innocent child from those who viewed his existence as nothing more than a political inconvenience to be eliminated. The attack came 3 nights later, under cover of darkness, when a group of hired mercenaries, funded by the conspiring faction within Vale's council, attempted to breach the camp's carefully established perimeter. Chaos erupted as defenders clashed with attackers throughout the darkened forest, the sounds of the confrontation echoing across the hillside, as Elena, Damien, and their combined allies fought fiercely to protect the camp and everyone within it. Elena fought with a ferocity born from years of careful training. Her earlier fear transformed entirely into fierce, protective determination. She moved through the chaos with practiced precision, guided by instincts sharpened through countless hours of preparation under Mara's patient guidance. Damien fought alongside her, his own considerable skill as Alpha King, evident in every controlled, powerful movement. His protective fury, directed entirely toward defending the family he had only just begun to properly know. Together, they proved a formidable combination, their earlier estrangement forgotten entirely, in the urgent need to protect what mattered most. The confrontation lasted through much of the night before the attackers, significantly outmatched by the combined strength of camp defenders and royal guards working in careful coordination, finally retreated into the darkness, their mission decisively unsuccessful. As dawn broke over the hillside camp, revealing the exhausted but triumphant defenders, Elena found herself standing beside Damien amid the settling chaos, both of them breathing heavily from the intensity of the fight, their earlier animosity replaced by the shared relief of having successfully protected their son and everyone who called this camp home. "We did it," Elena said quietly, still processing the adrenaline coursing through her system. "We did," Damien agreed, studying her with newfound respect and admiration. "Elena, I know words alone can't undo the past, but watching you tonight, watching the strength and courage you've built since I let you down so completely, I understand now, more clearly than ever, exactly what I lost that day in the courtyard." Elena met his gaze steadily, years of careful emotional guarding, slowly beginning to soften under the weight of everything they had just experienced together. "You lost my trust," she said honestly. "That's not something rebuilt overnight, no matter how bravely you fought tonight." "I understand," Damien said sincerely. "And I'm prepared to spend as long as necessary earning it back properly, one honest day at a time." As the camp began the slow process of recovery following the attack, Elena found herself reflecting on everything that had changed since that painful night in the courtyard years earlier. She had built an entirely new life for herself and her son, discovered strengths she never knew she possessed, and now stood facing an uncertain future alongside a man who had genuinely proven, through decisive action rather than empty words, that he had changed significantly from the person who had once rejected her so cruelly. Whatever came next, whatever complicated path lay ahead for their unconventional family, Elena understood clearly that she would face it as an equal, not as the desperate, heartbroken woman who had once fled Vale territory in humiliation and grief, but as someone who had earned every ounce of the strength and respect she now commanded. In the weeks following the failed attack, Damien returned to Vale territory to address the betrayal within his own council directly. Armed with clear evidence of the conspiracy against his son, he moved swiftly and decisively, removing the disloyal faction from positions of power and severing formal ties with the Locke family entirely, ensuring neither could threaten his family's safety again. The kingdom's advisors, witnessing their king's unwavering determination to protect the son he had only recently discovered, quickly fell in line behind his decisive leadership, recognizing that Damien had grown considerably from the uncertain, politically cautious ruler who had once sacrificed personal happiness for calculated alliance. With the immediate threat neutralized, Damien returned to the hillside camp, this time formally, accompanied by a proper royal escort and the clear intention of publicly acknowledging Kaelin as his legitimate heir before the entire kingdom. He found Elena waiting near the camp's central clearing, her expression calm and steady, though he could still detect the careful guardedness that years of pain had taught her to maintain even now, even after everything they had recently endured together. "I've come to ask you something important," Damien said, his voice carrying a nervous vulnerability unusual for a man who ruled an entire kingdom with practiced confidence. Not as a king making demands, but simply as Kaelin's father, hoping for your honest consideration. Elena studied him carefully, noting the genuine humility in his expression, so different from the cold, calculated demeanor he had displayed that terrible day in the courtyard. "I'm listening," she said simply. "I want to formally acknowledge Kaelin as my heir, publicly and permanently," Damien explained. "But more than that, I want the chance to properly earn your trust again, Elena. Not because political circumstances demand it, but because I've realized, through everything that's happened, that you were never simply a convenient alliance to me. You were, and still are, the person who makes me want to be a better man and a better king. Elena felt tears sting her eyes at the raw sincerity in his words, so different from the empty promises she might once have expected from him. Still, years of careful self-protection had taught her not to rush into decisions based purely on emotion, no matter how genuine that emotion appeared. "What exactly are you proposing?" she asked carefully. "I'm not asking you to simply return to my kingdom as though nothing happened," Damien clarified. "I understand that trust like ours doesn't rebuild overnight, and I have no intention of rushing you into decisions before you're ready. I'm simply asking for the chance to prove myself properly, over time, in whatever way you're comfortable allowing. Kalen deserves to know his heritage, and eventually take his rightful place as my heir. But how we navigate that, and what role you choose for yourself within that process, remains entirely your decision." Elena considered his words carefully, recognizing the significant growth evident in how he approached this conversation, compared to the man who had once made unilateral decisions about their future, without any consideration for her voice or feelings. "I won't uproot Kalen's entire world overnight," she said finally. "He has a family here, people who love him, a life he understands and feels safe within. Any transition needs to happen carefully, at a pace that considers his well-being above all else." "Agreed completely," Damien said immediately. "We can arrange gradual visits, allow him time to adjust slowly to knowing his kingdom and his heritage, without disrupting everything familiar and comforting in his current life." Elena nodded slowly, appreciating his willingness to prioritize their son's emotional stability over the kingdom's political convenience. "And what about us?" she asked finally, unable to avoid the question that had lingered unspoken between them since his return. "What exactly are you hoping for, beyond simply acknowledging Kalen?" Damien met her gaze directly, his expression open and vulnerable, in a way she had never witnessed from him before, not even during their earlier relationship years ago. "I'm hoping, eventually, that you might consider giving me the chance to earn back what I so carelessly threw away," he admitted honestly. "Not because I expect it or believe I deserve it easily, but because these past weeks, watching you fight alongside me, watching the incredible woman you've become, I've realized more clearly than ever that losing you was the greatest mistake of my entire life." Elena felt the walls she had carefully constructed around her heart begin to soften, though she remained cautious, unwilling to abandon hard-earned wisdom for the comfort of easy forgiveness. "Actions matter more than words," she said finally. "If you truly want to earn back my trust, you'll need to prove it consistently, over time, not through grand gestures or beautiful speeches." "I understand completely," Damien said, relief evident in his expression at her willingness to consider the possibility at all. "And I intend to prove myself exactly that way, for as long as it takes." Over the following months, Damien made good on his promise, visiting the camp regularly, building genuine relationships, not just with Kalen, but with Mara, Nora, and the entire community that had protected his son during the years he had remained unaware of his existence. He arranged for Kalen to gradually experience life within Vale territory, careful never to rush the transition or undermine the stability Elena had worked so hard to build. Slowly, gradually, Elena found herself trusting him again, not blindly, but through consistent, proven actions that demonstrated genuine change rather than empty promises. Their relationship rebuilt itself carefully, brick by brick, grounded now in mutual respect and honest communication, rather than the naive, unquestioning love that had once left her so vulnerable to devastating heartbreak. Nearly a year after Damien's first fateful visit to the hillside camp, Kalen was formally presented before the entire Vale kingdom as the legitimate heir to the throne, his silver eyes shining with pride as he stood beside both parents during the ceremony. This time, there was no cruel rejection, no devastating public humiliation. Instead, Damien knelt before Elena in front of the assembled crowd, offering not a crown demanded through duty, but a partnership earned through genuine redemption. "I once stood before you and refused the greatest gift I was ever offered," Damien said, his voice carrying clearly across the courtyard that had once witnessed her deepest humiliation. "Today, I ask instead, with complete humility and genuine love, whether you might consider giving me the honor of standing beside you, not as subjects bound by duty, but as partners bound by mutual respect and hard-earned trust. Elena looked out at the crowd gathered before her, then down at Damien, kneeling humbly at her feet, and finally toward Kalen, watching the moment with quiet hope shining in his familiar silver eyes. She thought of everything she had survived, everything she had built, and the strength she had discovered within herself through years of hardship and quiet determination. This time, the choice belonged entirely to her. "Rise," Elena said finally, extending her hand toward him with a small, genuine smile. "Let's build something better this time, together, on our own terms." As Damien rose to stand beside her, the crowd erupted into genuine celebration, witnessing not the cold political alliance they had once expected, but something far more meaningful, a partnership built on redemption, respect, and hard-earned love. Elena Bright, once publicly rejected and left with nothing, now stood as the true Alpha Queen, having reclaimed both her power and her heart entirely on her own terms.